On a Dominaria rocked by the end of the Brothers' War, the survivors fight for whatever lands and beliefs they can. Zealots march during this time of turmoil, scorching the land of the artifice that broke the world. Hey everyone, I'm Simon here for the Aether Hub, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today we have Chapter 2 of the Brothers' War story, as we follow the recovery efforts of Urza's wife, Queen Kayla, along with his former apprentice, Thanos. As they look to restore some semblance of their world, the Church of Tal, religious zealots totally opposed to the use of magic and technology, seek to put them to the torch. Before we begin, I just want to thank the fans of the channel who have supported our work by becoming members. If you want to join the Vorthos army, consider becoming a member yourself by clicking the join button on the channel homepage. Now let's get back to the lore with the Brothers' War Chapter 2, The Beginning, written by Miguel Lopez. Thanos looked out from his office window at his workshop below, watching his automatons on the assembly line as they waited to be repurposed. The veil had been lifted from his dream of mechanized peace, revealing the bloody reality. All machines could be bent for the purpose of war. Thanos had sketched the plans for the civil automatons himself, but everything he knew, he learned from Urza, who had only ever created machines to kill and destroy. His civils were animated by power stones, the same way Urza and Mishra's war machines were powered. Thanos realized that Pendragon's stockpile would soon be depleted, and by offering his aid in digging up the cache on Argive, he set the stage for war to rage again. Thanos sank into his chair, looking over a pile of paper and text on his desk, a collection of his and Urza's work. He found one of his own notebooks, and while thumbing through his designs, he realized how different he was now. In his youth, he had been so confident, self-assured, justified by his duty to protect the realm. He was different now. He would lead. He would change the world for the better. He tore out a few pages from his notebook, designs for a mechanical snake, a bird, and a mouse, all intended to be toys, and shoved them into the pocket of his coat. None of those working in the factory noticed the fire until it was too late. Flames licked the glass of Thanos' office, devouring everything inside. The siege of Pendragon lasted a single day. By twilight, the remaining Crusaders were staggering through the only breach in the wall they had managed. All the Talites could do was watch Pendragon's defenders and armed civils take prisoners and collect the dead. Through the long, dark, cold months of winter, zealots of the Church of Tal snuck into the merchant and residential districts of Pendragon. They formed their cults within the city, teaching Tal's word that cursed mage and machine. Though there was no magic in Pendragon, they saw demons in all artifice, and that was enough to stoke their evangelical fervor. As Riddick's declaration was refused and the city gates closed, the zealots set off explosions and started fires, burning Thanos' factory, the residential areas, and even the merchant ships. When the city guard and civils came to put the fires out, they were attacked by the Talites. But Pendragon's militia, returning from the wall, helped drive the zealots back towards their safe houses. Now that they were barricaded and surrounded, Kayla's staff looked to her to order them executed, exiled, or jailed. The following day, Kayla inspected the charred skeleton of Thanos' factory. Muriel informed her that the fire had started in the artificer's own office. Thanos had not been found. There wasn't even an unidentified body. No one else died. The only casualties were a dozen civil automatons destroyed. Kayla knew that Thanos had done this. He had left her nothing. No plans from which they could recreate the civils to aid Pendragon through the coming winter. She knew the existing civils had old, worn power stones with short lives ahead of them. Thanos, in taking his life's work, had doomed the city. Not immediately, or even in a few years, but these winters wouldn't stop. The seasons would continue to compress, and the ice would creep closer. Then the power stones would fail, and in an age of nothing but winter, Pendragon would die. The end came 10 years after the siege. First, a summer, without the chirping of cicadas or other insects. The next year, the birds followed, leaving an eerie silence throughout the harbor. In the winter, the bay waters froze, trapping the city's fishing and trade boats. With no food and no work, riots broke out. And after they were calmed, the citizens took to building huts near the docks and fished for themselves. Pendragon's scouts went on expeditions looking for warmer lands, and returned with news of green grass west to the Kerr Ridges. The villagers found there had assured them that the lands across the Great Desert had been insulated against the worst of the cataclysm. Kayla decided that Pendragon's salvation lay to the west. Caravans were raised and the citizens departed. None who went ever returned to Pendragon. The city grew quiet, the remaining inhabitants too stubborn or too hopeful to leave. Kayla remained there as winter crept further into the summer months, and storms would deposit snowdrifts as tall as the buildings. The remaining civils plowed the streets and eventually died mid-labor, becoming pillars of ice and snow. The end came in autumn, when Kayla's scouts returned from an expedition to investigate rumors of the Cult of Gix, an old threat. They reported that the north was covered in a great glacier, and the northernmost mountains of the Kerrs had collapsed. When they fled to the northeastern coast, they witnessed the ocean frozen into a landmass, tall as the Kerr Ridges themselves. The world was indeed ending. Though the ice was slow, it was inevitable. On the outside, for her people, Kayla was calm and stoic. This was only a persona. In private, she was anxious, wrestling pain, anger, and grief. She assured her people that they would persist, but she felt nothing. She could not even muster love for her grandson, and begun to think that her grief might kill her. Kayla quit the city, leaving a note for her council, and went to her manor. There, she lay on the floor and screamed, summoning every memory of Urza, of Tanos, Harbin, Jarzel, her parents, the burning of Krug that was once her home. She sobbed and then felt something snap. Heat coursed through her, and she barely managed to throw back her cloak before sparks erupted from her hands, becoming flames. Magic. As a girl, Kayla had heard of wonders like this, but even she dismissed it as fantasy. Now, she couldn't deny it. At her lowest point, she had channeled fire. For the first time in years, Kayla laughed. She returned to the city and resumed her duties, and sent stewards to Pendragon's libraries for any information on magic. Survivors of the Third Path, an esoteric order that studied magic, had brought their writings when they settled in Pendragon after the war. In this collection, there were the writings of Hercule, one of the Path's leaders rumored to use magic to obliterate Mishra's forces as they marched against his city. Kayla followed the text and began to meditate, improving her focus until she could channel that energy into a stone found in the ruins of her bellowed Krug. The stone would glow with heat, and Kayla practiced until it did not burn or cause any pain. She learned to control it, to direct the flame, and realized if she could do that, then she had the power to bring herself out of the darkness. With each session, Kayla sifted through her grief, but instead of raging, she imbued that stone with fire. She learned to control her anger, accept her despair, and set it aside. Kayla would not die. She changed. She survived. Scouts returned with hope from the west. Kayla ordered the city to form wagon trains, Muriel and her scouts to act as vanguard. They would see each other again one day in the west. In the winter after the wagon train had left, Talites returned to Pendragon asking where they were hiding their machines. There were no more machines, just cold and hungry people. Kayla ordered their gates to be open and offered them shelter. She asked about Riddick, who she did not see present. She was informed that he had died when they marched on Mistra's forge, where machines had resided in great numbers. Scouts returned to her with blades of grass and pressed flowers, and news of towns and cities, of a man and flying machine in the sky. Harbin. Kayla did not dare to hope, but when it came time for her to leave her city, she prepared with a final caravan west. They traveled through the Kerrs, losing a quarter of their people to cold, dark, and desperate predators. They traveled out of the mountains and into the lands of Kayla's youth, the land she would have once ruled as queen. They followed the Mardoon River and found towns with soil still rich and untouched by frost. Some of the caravan settled there, but Kayla moved on. Eventually, they came to the first city of the west, one that welcomed the caravan to stay for the winter. In the spring, Kayla would continue her journey west. The evening before their departure, she sat at the dinner table with her grandson, Jarzel. Though he was a man, Jarzel was as timid as a schoolboy when he announced that he could not follow his grandmother any further. He had heard stories of a school of magic on the banks of the Ranum Lake. All Kayla could do was hug him goodbye. She was an old woman now, and as her story might be ending, Jarzel's was just beginning. Kayla traveled via a riverboat, and 5 years after she had departed Penregon, she returned to the ruins of Krug. There was a new warlord here, Fask, the tyrant of Krug. He had killed his way into ruling the petty kingdom on the southwestern coast after the Cataclysm. Fask, the fairest warlord the kingdom had known, demanded that with all of his citizens' bounty, 4 of 10 were given to him, and the remainder shared by his loyal subjects. Warlord Fask would see the end of his reign as his rivals conquered lands within his borders. The accounts of the end of his life were lost to war, time, and ice. Many centuries later, an ancient man would tell his grandchildren the story of Warlord Fask, the story of kingdoms rising and falling because of a ghost, and the importance of omens and magic. The ghost story, though changing through the centuries, always had a common theme. Fask awoke to a sound in his chambers, grabbing his sword from the bed beside him. He had ordered his chambers to be filled with the contents of his treasury. On a web of strings were cans, coins, medallions, knives, male shirts, anything that would make a commotion if touched. The warlord had been plagued by voices in the night. He feared an assassin, or something worse, fate. He remembered the words of an oracle he had encountered while on his conquest of the Sword Marches. The dead do not forget their killer. We will meet again someday. Every cut of your sword will be returned 1,000-fold. She had cursed him after he destroyed her nameless town. He heard a rattle at the foot of his bed. Fask trembled in fear, demanding that this spirit reveal itself. No answer. Maybe the wind. Another rattle, and then a hiss like an angry beast. He backed away, reaching for an oil lamp and opening its shade. As the foot of his bed was illuminated, he saw a man standing there. Not a man, but a shadow. It was a spirit, half realized as formless smoke and then shifting into the solid figure of a man. The spirit had close-cropped hair and a neatly trimmed beard. It stared at him, unmoving. Fask screamed and covered his eyes as the spirit's misty legs carried him backwards, bumping into another string of cans and medallions. Guards burst into the room, finding their lord on the floor. Some of the men helped Fask to his feet, and others, who thought their lord insane, exchanged dark looks and left. But this wasn't a ghost, nor a spirit. "Kaya," Teferi whispered. "Pull me out. I think they saw me." Teferi watched the screaming man roll around on his bed as guards tried their best to calm him. He was meant to be insubstantial, not actually physically present, but he was able to reach out and pluck one of the trap strings. He told Kaya the temporal anchor wasn't calibrated correctly. He didn't go far enough back. The spirit form of Teferi dissolved into mist, leaving the tyrant of Krug screaming, and his people with the lasting story of the ghost who toppled a tyrant. So with chapter 2 in the books, it looks like we're really leaning into the post-Brothers War events, almost like an epilogue to that novel, filling us in on how Dominaria carried on after the Silex blast. The most interesting part of this story was the end, this ghost story, which shows us the possible consequences of Teferi's interference with time. The appearance of Teferi as a ghost was passed down from generation to generation. It literally impacted the lives of thousands, just not very significantly. But it leaves us wondering, what if Teferi meddled more? How much would time be altered? Anyway, that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Thank you all so much for watching and supporting the content. You can show your support by becoming a member of the Vorthos Army with a channel membership, much like these fine folks here, or by leaving this video a like, becoming a subscriber, and of course sharing it with your friends. And that's going to do it for me, guys. Until next time, see ya!